Well, around for this second half hour, we're busting through it, and Doc posed an interesting question that I'll rehash here. Can we talk about preventing mass shootings and gun violence without talking about gun control? We might as well just say gun control. I mean, it's a pejorative no matter how you look at it. I guess that's a broad question, because gun control for the right has taken on, that term anyway, has taken on with almost the same kind of just bitterness and virulence in its opposition as global warming. You know, the global warming is now a punchline for the right, just in the same way that gun control is. And so anytime you talk about gun control, you can see pro-gun conservatives' ears just turn off. And I don't think I'm being overly critical. I think that's because we're almost not talking about the same thing anymore. From the liberal side of things, if we're talking about gun control, at least what's been proposed is, the panoply of changes to existing law, maybe banning for sale some kinds of semi-automatic weapons, that sort of thing, or more modestly, universal background checks, closing the gun show loophole, all the talking points you've heard from Democrats for the last few years. You've heard my position on this more recently. Yeah. Where I think that I think universal background checks has got a lot of appeal. And I don't know what the opposition of that necessarily is. And that would be a decent place to start. At least experts that study this stuff say background checks is probably the lightest touch that you can put that might have the biggest impact. Maybe not a huge impact, but it would have the largest one. But I'm more concerned with making guns safer in and of themselves, or making guns more personalized in and of themselves.
Yeah, but let's leave the weapon out of this discussion, because what I want to do,
but your question is whether it can be. I don't think so. To answer that, I don't think it can be.
That's true. Let me maybe set this up a little bit better. I'm having a discussion with a guy I respect, whose brain is pretty smart, last Thursday, and he asked me that question, and I immediately went to gun grabbers and the rest of that, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm not even talking about that. He says, I have guns. I don't want anybody to take away guns. Anybody who's right thinking doesn't want guns taken from anybody who's reasonable. And it was a 20-minute discussion before it finally clicked in my head. He's really asking me, what can we do to prevent mass shootings without having to get into the discussion of the Second Amendment and gun restriction and the rest of it? Because, and he pointed out, and you and I both know this happens, mm-hmm. The Democrats never let a crisis go to waste. They politicize any kind of gun, anything, to try to, attack and take away your guns. And the Republicans on the other side, and trust me, there are people on both sides of the aisle bought by the NRA, and then soon nothing's done. It's the same old crap over and over. That's what he finally pointed out to me. And I thought to myself, we're going to talk about that. So my thing is there, all right, you don't think that there's a way to do this. I think that there's at least a way to talk about it without introducing guns. And so from my perspective, there's a lot of things we could do to prevent mass shooting. None of it's going to be as easy as passing a law. And the first thing I think we ought to do is reintroduce gun safety classes in the school.
But there you've already mentioned guns. Well, right there you've already talked about something to do with guns.
Yeah, but not the Second Amendment.
But so now I don't understand the parameters of the discussion.
Maybe I'm not being clear.
Yeah.
The thing is when I grew up, you had a hunter safety course. This is how you're safe around weapons. This is what this weapon can do. This is you're taking a life. And I remember, and all I had is a BB gun, right? And I might have been 10. And I remember looking at that BB gun thinking, this thing is dangerous. I can kill stuff with this. And I remember it's one of the very few times I wasn't all mouthy during class. That's the truth. And I listened to this guy. I think changing the culture surrounding the gun and putting it back into your toolkit instead of making it part of your arsenal. I think that would have some benefit. Teaching, getting away from the gun culture of the United States, because I'm watching the old Westerns. I like those, Maverick and the rest of it. And one of the best Westerns ever is Maverick, and he hardly ever pulls a gun.
Right.
He's sitting there using his mind, his brain. That's kind of how I was brought up around weapons. We had that kind of training in school. Our culture was not, geez, I don't like you, so let's resolve it with a weapon. It was, well, let's resolve this in some other way. We don't have to use weapons. We can get an arbitrator. I mean, back then it's like you'd go get, Joe Bishop is the person we used most of the time, right, in grade school. So I think that would be at least one step.
Well, I guess the response that I would have to that is, there's a lot of folks out there that talk about, I was listening to an interview of a guy that says, hey, look, what we're trying to do is in an honest way, he's a law enforcement official, pro-gun, writes a concealed carry blog or something saying, look, I know that not everybody wants to be armed. I know that not everybody is comfortable. I get that. I have a lot of sympathy for people that think that way. What I want everybody to understand is, if you are trained, like you're saying, if you're trained properly to use a firearm, if you understand what goes into that training, or you talk to a guy like me, you will know that the weapon is absolutely, you're trained down to your shoelaces, that the weapon is the absolute last resort, that we're trained to follow a series of steps until drawing that weapon becomes necessary in the last defense of one's own life or one's own family's life. Like, for example, and a good example, and you've heard me rail against this before. One guy said, if you come across somebody, if you're a concealed carry person, you come across somebody who's broken into your car and stealing your stuff, you let them take it. You let them take it. You don't do anything. You don't confront the person. You sure as heck don't shoot them over property. You've heard me get fired up about that, where someone is stealing something from you, stealing property from you that you can replace, and you kill that person. That to me is just, it's completely inexcusable thing. That's the level of discourse that we don't hear, that at least on my side of things, that I don't hear from the NRA or from the more vocal pro-gun folks. That makes the discussion a lot harder, because then when I hear pushback to something even as simple as that, hey, if someone is going to steal if someone's stealing something out of my car, I'm not at home, I come upon my house, my empty house, people are taking my TV out, I'm not going to shoot that guy. I'm going to file a police report. I'm going to get my stuff back. Hopefully the guy gets caught, whatever, and punished. I'm not going to take a life over some property. That level of discourse then devolves to, then it devolves to the gun at that point, because, you have a right to defend. You have a right to defend yourself, absolute right to, and the best tool to defend that self in the moment is a gun, and it all comes crashing back down to that. That's why I don't think that the two are you can pull them apart. You have to deal with, like you said, the gun culture. Absolutely, I completely agree with that. But you have to also deal with the tool itself, because it is something that, in the wrong hands, is a deadly force that I don't know that we're adequately addressing. I don't know that anybody in Chicago thinks we're adequately addressing it. I certainly don't think the people in Orlando think we're adequately addressing it, even though we both agree violent crime is going down. Gun ownership as a thing is going down slowly. Fewer people own more guns, but guns are not being sold in as high a volume as happened over years. All that stuff is happening just sort of naturally in society. So let's try and fix some of these horrendous things. But I think we got to talk about both. I don't know that you can get away from one over the other. And for my money, the biggest obstacle is the complete and total unanimity and total sort of like sanctified position the Second Amendment has gained.
Well, all right. We're over our time. We're going to come back. We're going to finish up a discussion about whether or not we can change our culture, what we can do to help prevent these mass shootings. Because I have a couple more ideas I think would be good. Thanks for tuning in. We couldn't do what we do without you. We want to thank all of our sponsors, Des Moines Anesthesia at 515-574-6442, Halo Capital, Des Moines Interest Rates at DesMoinesInterestsRates.com, Labinas Law Firm, outside of Bertrosh Law Firm, best law firm ever hit the ground running here in Iowa, and Bertrosh and Associates. We thank you for tuning in. We'll be back right after this break. Hope you're doing well.